In 1968, RCA unveiled the world's first liquid crystal display at a press conference in Manhattan, demonstrated through a small digital clock. The LCD was an American invention, built by an American team at an American laboratory in Princeton, New Jersey, and the underlying patents belonged entirely to RCA. So how did the United States end up with almost no stake in the roughly $92 billion industry that technology created? While China now manufactures more than 70% of every LCD panel on the planet? In 1962, inside RCA's David Sarnoff Research Center in Princeton, New Jersey, a researcher named George Heilmeyer began experimenting with the electro-optic properties of liquid crystals, building on earlier findings by his colleague Richard Williams. Over the next several years, Heilmeyer and his team, including Louis Zanoni and Lucien Barton, developed the first practical liquid crystal display through a technique called dynamic scattering mode. The displays had poor contrast and required relatively high voltage, but they worked, and nothing else like them existed anywhere in the world. The technology improved quickly, and not always inside RCA. In 1969, James Ferguson, a researcher formerly at Kent State's Liquid Crystal Institute, patented the twisted nematic field effect, an approach that delivered far better contrast and far lower voltage than Heilmeyer's original dynamic scattering mode. Ferguson's twisted nematic technique, not RCA's original method, would become the actual commercial foundation of the LCD industry going forward. On May 28, 1968, RCA put its results in front of the press at the company's Manhattan headquarters. The centerpiece was a small digital clock, and the reaction from the electronics world was immediate. That same year, RCA researcher Bernard Lechner proposed driving liquid crystal displays with thin film transistors, a concept that would eventually underpin every flat panel screen manufactured anywhere on Earth. RCA had everything it needed to own the next half-century of display technology: the invention, the research team, the patent portfolio, and a multi-year head start over every competitor on the planet. Their decision to treat LCD development as a side project was a warning sign, and nobody inside the company recognized it at the time. The reason those patents ended up in foreign hands goes back to 1958. That year, RCA settled a Department of Justice antitrust case under the Sherman Act by agreeing to a consent decree with sweeping terms. RCA would pool roughly 100 color television patents royalty-free, license around 12,000 additional existing patents royalty-free to any American company that applied, and offer any new patents developed over the following 10 years at a rate the government defined as reasonable. Those royalty-free terms applied only to domestic companies. Foreign licensees still paid full rates, and RCA actively marketed its patent portfolio overseas, collecting licensing revenue from Japanese firms including Sony and Matsushita, and European companies like Philips. If you're wondering how a single antitrust settlement in 1958 ended up reshaping the global electronics industry for the next 7 decades, the answer is that it turned RCA's most valuable research into a commodity. Any funded competitor could purchase access to the patents, hire their own engineers to improve on the designs, and build products that RCA itself had never bothered to develop. Inside RCA, the LCD program never received the investment it needed. The company's corporate strategy in the late 1960s centered on color television, and by 1969, leadership had pivoted hard toward computing. Both moves drained money and attention away from flat panel display research. The LCD assembly operation at Raritan, New Jersey, running since 1969, was told to find its own outside funding rather than receiving direct R&D support from the company. So the team built whatever external clients would pay for: an animated advertising display, a gas pump readout, a screen embedded in a car side view mirror. George Heilmeyer himself, the researcher who had led the entire LCD program from its earliest experiments, left RCA in 1970 to become a White House Fellow. He would eventually rise to director of DARPA, the U.S. military's advanced research agency, leading exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward technology development that RCA had just abandoned in its own labs. Through the first half of the 1970s, RCA wound the entire LCD program down. What happened next between RCA and a Japanese electronics company called Sharp is the part that still doesn't make sense from a pure business perspective. When RCA announced its LCD breakthrough in May 1968, a Sharp Corporation executive named Tomio Wada was already searching for a low-power display to put inside a pocket calculator that hadn't been built yet. In the years following that announcement, Sharp engineer Tadashi Sasaki traveled to RCA to investigate the technology firsthand. According to Sasaki's own account, he proposed embedding Sharp engineers inside an RCA facility to collaborate on LCD development, and RCA turned that offer down without much explanation. RCA told Sharp directly that it had no interest in calculator display applications. The company considered the response time of the LCD too slow for that use case and was instead pursuing a watch display license with Timex. Sharp paid RCA roughly $3 million for rights to the LCD patents, brought the technology back to Japan, and built the product RCA wouldn't build. In 1973, Sharp released the EL-805, the world's first pocket-sized calculator with a liquid crystal display, combining CMOS LSI circuitry and the screen on a single glass substrate. The calculator was thin, portable, and ran on minimal power, exactly the kind of product the consumer electronics market was waiting for. It was also the exact application that RCA had been told about, judged unworkable, and dismissed. You'd think someone inside RCA's New Jersey headquarters would have reconsidered the company's display strategy after watching Sharp bring that product to market. But there's no indication that anyone did. Sharp could have stopped at pocket calculators and still gone down as the company that brought LCD technology to consumers. They didn't. By the late 1980s, Sharp had moved well beyond small screens and into territory that would reshape the entire electronics industry. In 1988, the company demonstrated the first 14-inch full-color, full-motion active matrix TFT LCD, a breakthrough widely credited with launching the large panel display industry. That demonstration was the proof of concept that convinced the electronics world a flat panel screen could eventually replace the cathode ray tube entirely. Laptop screens were the first major application, followed by flat panel televisions, and Japanese manufacturers rode that momentum hard. By the mid-1990s, Japanese companies dominated the global LCD panel market, with some industry estimates putting their combined share as high as 94%. By the late 1990s, two companies in Seoul, South Korea, were taking a fundamentally different approach to entering the LCD business. Samsung and LG committed enormous capital to panel manufacturing and absorbed years of sustained operating losses, pouring money into production capacity at a pace that would have been financially suicidal without long-term corporate backing. The strategy was straightforward: build at a scale that Japanese competitors couldn't match, hold on through the red ink and wait for the economics to turn. That was only the opening phase of a much larger redistribution that would reshape the global display industry over the following 2 decades. By the late 1990s, the gamble had paid off. South Korean firms overtook Japanese manufacturers in LCD panel market share, powered by aggressive investment, a strong yen that steadily eroded Japan's pricing advantage, and slower corporate restructuring across Japan's electronics sector. The country that had commercialized the LCD was already losing the industry it had spent 2 decades building. Japanese manufacturers had a narrowing window to restructure and compete at the production scale the market now demanded. That window closed before most of them moved through it. While Japan's LCD companies were still absorbing the impact of South Korea's rise, Chinese manufacturers were executing their own version of the same playbook that had worked for Samsung and LG. Massive production capacity, significant state-backed investment, and expansion timelines that prioritize market share over near-term profitability. By 2024, mainland China accounted for roughly 70 to 72% of global LCD panel manufacturing capacity. The 3 largest LCD TV panel manufacturers worldwide as of early 2025 were all Chinese companies: BOE, TCL, and HKC. The final years of Japanese LCD manufacturing have played out as a series of plant closures, failed acquisitions, and financial collapses that read more like a liquidation timeline than an industry transition. Sharp, which Foxconn acquired a majority stake in back in 2016, shut down LCD TV panel production at its Sakai plant in 2024. That facility had opened in 2009 as the world's first 10th generation LCD production line. Then in February 2026, Foxconn's planned acquisition of Sharp's Kamiyama No. 2 plant fell through amid weak global LCD pricing, and the plant is ceasing production around August 2026, with approximately 1,170 jobs eliminated through voluntary retirement. Japan Display Incorporated, or JDI, was formed in 2011 by merging the LCD divisions of Sony, Hitachi, and Toshiba into one company. JDI became heavily dependent on Apple, which at times accounted for more than half of its total revenue. When Apple began shifting iPhones to OLED screens, starting with the iPhone X in 2017, the consequences were severe. JDI and Sharp's combined iPhone LCD shipments dropped from roughly 200 million units per year at their mid-2010s peak to about 20 million per year by 2023. As of 2024, JDI had recorded 10 consecutive years of net losses. A company assembled from the display divisions of 3 of Japan's largest electronics firms with government-linked investment behind it turned out to be entirely dependent on a single customer's technology decisions. JOLED, a Japanese OLED venture backed by JDI, Sony, Panasonic, and the state-linked Innovation Network Corporation of Japan, was designed to be the path forward into next-generation displays. It filed for bankruptcy in March 2023 with approximately $257 million in liabilities. As of mid-2026, the display market that RCA invented, neglected, and licensed away is worth roughly $92 billion a year across all applications. Chinese manufacturers produce the overwhelming majority of panels in it. The last major Japanese LCD production lines are either already closed or shutting down within months, and the American company that started the entire industry hasn't existed as an independent entity since 1986. And this story isn't finished, because the next generation of display technology, OLED and micro-LED, is already following a remarkably similar geographic trajectory. The same concentration of Asian manufacturers leading production, the same Western companies positioned as customers rather than builders, and the same structural incentives pushing capacity eastward. Whether that pattern breaks or simply repeats itself with a new set of screens is still being determined.